Okay. I don't know about you guys, but it's stressful. This is the time where midterms are happening and everything is due. And so I started looking out a couple weeks ahead on our Moodle page as to what you have due. And I thought, well, we need to talk about these things to kind of help alleviate any stress you might have or for you to not be caught off guard. So I have pulled up the Moodle page. It looks like it is sharing with folks at home. So I want to scroll down. We will talk about keep talking about news a little bit, but so this week we're on topic 6 because it's week 6. And you did have forum 8 to do. I sent you guys an email, but not everybody reads it. We have 20 forums for the semester. And by now, hopefully you got the point that they're brief. Not that I don't want you to take them seriously, but they're not elaborate forums like you will find in your upper level classes when you move into senior level classes. But you still need to do them. They're each worth 5 points apiece. So at the end of the semester, there's 20 of them times 5, it's worth 100 points. So often what I do is I just grade them at the end. I print off, everybody's forums and give you a grade. 1 or 2 people said, yeah, I'd kind of like to know where I stand, which seems reasonable. So by the end of next week, we will do forums 9 and 10. So you have all of next week to do forums 9 and 10. I believe that's correct on topic 7. Yes. And then I'm going to give you through that Sunday. And then that Monday and Tuesday, I will give you a grade out of 50 points. I'll just say on these first 10 forums, you got a 50 out of a 50, you got a 45 out of 50. So that going into the second half of the class, if you're doing these. But basically the forums, if you're just responding to the questions, they're not complicated and they're worth 5 points. You will lose points if you don't do them. And I'm not saying do sloppy work, but these aren't really very hard. And so if you're making a good faith effort, that's all you really need to do. And the forums are kind of designed to have you interact with that week's material. So make sure by the end of next week, next Sunday, you have all 10 forums done. I'm not going to go in and bar you from doing any you might be missing. So if you're missing any, go fill them in. Once I grade them, I will. So that's with the forums. Any question about forums?
Do you want them like a certain length? Or just kind of give your best answer and doesn't matter the length as long as you try?
Basically, if you're answering the question, if you write one word, obviously that's a problem. But I would say, a decent paragraph or 2. I'm not expecting 500 words, that kind of thing. But, something that, something that shows that you interacted a little bit with the material. Does that make sense? Okay. Because these are actually points kind of designed to help your grade if you just keep up with them.
Hi, I was having internet issues and just was able to join.
Hey, Colin, thanks for telling me because I don't have you down, but I'll put you down now. Well, thank you. Okay, so.
Do you have me down? I don't know if you sent me or not.
I do have you down, Anna. I have Tana, Anna, Riley, Colin, and Nathan down. So I think I do have you all down. I didn't call your names out. I just looked up on the screen.
Okay, thank you.
But that's okay. Thanks for checking.
Do you have my name down?
We just care. I don't. Thank you for. I don't know how I missed you. Did you just chime, or did you just get in? Oh, there's more names here. There are several people I don't have down. Austin, I put you down. JoJo, put you down. Sierra, I have you. And Luke, I have you. Okay. Okay, if anybody else pops up, I appreciate the audience would let me know. I think we've got everybody now. Makes me feel better about attendance. There's a lot more people zooming in than I thought originally. So there are two things besides forums I wanted to bring your attention over the next couple of weeks. Okay, your next test is 10 days away. And you're probably thinking, what? I like to have a lot of little tests so that, you know, if you didn't do so good the first time, the next 3 might be, you know, help you out. So the next test is on October 11th. And I'm going to pull it up here. So exam 2 will open up October 11th, which is a Sunday. It'll open up at midnight. And then you have till Monday, almost midnight, to take it, a 48-hour window. And it's only covering 3 subjects: sound recording, radio, and film, okay? So just sound recording, radio, and film. So again, the fewer the topics under each test, the easier the test is in a sense. So sound recording you can find under topic 5. And then we did radio, which is topic 6. And then next week, we're going to talk about topic 7, which is film. And so 5, 6, and 7. So by the end of next week, you should be ready to take the test. So it'll open up next Sunday. Again, what I would do with each week is I would make sure I read everything underneath here about film origins, film studies, film genres. And I would print off the study guide, and I would do those study guides each week and study from them. Now, in addition to the test, there's another writing assignment coming due, and that's coming due the week after the test. So it is on a film treatment, and it will be due the following Sunday, the 18th. I know this stuff's on the Moodle page, but I also know sometimes you have a lot to keep up with, so I try to point stuff out to help you keep on track of it. So let's talk about the film treatment. By the way, on the news releases, I think I said this in the email I sent you guys. If this had been a hardcore news writing class, I would have graded them a much tougher because I would have lectured for 6 weeks on how to do it. We talked about it for a couple of days, and just briefly, given the fact that's not what this class is about, and I gave you the assignment to kind of have an understanding of news, I thought you guys did a really good job. There were really good grades on the assignment. And so the same is true to this next assignment. I want you to do a film treatment. Not all of you guys are going to be filmmakers, but I, again, won't grade this as if this is a film class, but this is what you need to do. So, let's see. And just so you know, it's open if you want to do it earlier. It's just, it closes on the 18th. So here's the assignment sheet for the film treatment. It's like the news articles, so you can go on and read this for yourself, but I want you to submit a film treatment that's 1 page. You want to single space it, double space between paragraphs, and it, like the news stories, worth 25 points. And it gives you the elements of a treatment here. It's basically, a treatment is a brief narrative about what your film is going to be about. It's kind of like a pitch. Like if I was a Hollywood producer and you were trying to sell me on a film, what would you do? And so it is a brief pitch. They vary in length from 1 to 25 pages, but because this isn't a film class, we're going to do 1 page. And you want to contain these elements. The hook, which is what makes your story unique, who the main characters are, setting, basic story, major turning points. And the treatment should be written in a dramatic style. So don't just summarize a story. Remember, you're trying to sell an idea to somebody. Avoid stuff like, you know, the story starts with, or in this scene we see. Instead, write the treatment in present tense and try to bring the person into action. Filmmaking is a visual medium, so you want to write with a visual style. And so that kind of gives you the parameters. And again, I know you're not all Steven Spielberg, but you guys, do have a flair for the dramatic, and you are good writers, because I just read your news stories. All of this can be found under topic 7. Here's the rubric I'm going to use to grade. So usually there's 4 or 5, well, here there's 5 things that I will take the grade from. Do you have a good hook? Do you have all the required elements? Is it compelling? Do you use proper style, like use of present tense, visual writing, that kind of thing? And then grammar and spelling. So very similar to the other assignment, it's just a film treatment instead. And then here's a sample film treatment. So I would strongly go in and read this. This is a really good example. So if you write something similar to this, that's kind of what I'm looking for. So that's due on the 18th. So finish your forums. Next Sunday, get ready for the test, and then the following Sunday, you'll have this film treatment. Any questions about things coming up due? Okay. I don't want to belabor it, but I think it does help when we talk about these things in class so you don't get caught off guard. Get my clicker out of the bag. So we began a discussion on Tuesday about the news chapter. And we've already gone through this slide. Any questions from Tuesday? I think we stopped on this one. We were talking a little bit about police tag-alongs. That's when reporters go with police when they drive around on their patrols, and then they, you know, if there's something happens that they report on it. And that's one thing they do to try to compete with each other. So journalism trends. The newsrooms seem like they're always in transition. They're in transition today for a variety of different reasons. They're in transition in part because of the digital age. We've been in it a while, but they're still constantly coming up with new ways to present stories in a digital format. There's an economic crisis in the sense that a lot of media outlets have had to struggle economically. Many have gone under. The ones who haven't have sometimes cut their staff. And so there are more stories than there are reporters at some outlets. And so one of the trends is fewer reporters are covering the same number of stories often, and so that means they have less time. And there was a study done not too long ago about, you know, if a reporter has to still do the same number of stories, but there's not people to share the workload, they can't call as many people for the stories, just in the interest of time. So one study done a few years ago said that, you know, reporters are relying on fewer and fewer sources for their stories. I'm not saying that they're necessarily not, you know, seeking all sides, but if I have to do 5 stories in a day, I can only call so many people, and I'm going to call somebody I know is going to call me back. And so PR people who are savvy know that reporters have fewer and fewer sources. And so that's sort of an opportunity that they can kind of take advantage of and leverage. So one of the trends is that we're getting less comprehensive coverage in the news of stories because reporters simply don't have time to cover them all. That also means that they're less enterprising. Sometimes people have a mistaken identity of what an investigative journalist does. You know, if you go out and you do research and you do an in-depth story, that's not necessarily an investigative story. Have any of you guys seen the movie Spotlight? Great movie. Movie of the year. Movie that portrayed journalism doing a good job. One of the things that's fascinating if you watch Spotlight is they take on a project, and then they had, I believe it was 4 people dedicated to a story, and they would dig and dig and dig and spend time until they had the story. And it would take months, sometimes maybe years. And there are a lot of news organizations today that can't afford that kind of time. And so there's probably less legitimate investigative journalism going on. The Watergate story, from the time of the burglary to the time of Nixon resigning, took a couple of years. And so true investigative journalism, it's not gone, but there's less of it. And thank goodness for, I don't know if you guys know about the Spotlight story, but it was about a group of reporters at, I believe, the Boston Globe that uncovered the priest scandal within the Catholic Church. And if they had not done this investigation, had not done the story, yeah, maybe the scandal would have gotten out, but not as soon as it did, and not as with the same amount of impact. And so it really matters to have investigative journalism going on. We need more enterprise, not less, but economically, we can't afford it. I did very little. I don't think I really ever did anything you could call investigative reporting, because I went to Congress. I was a congressional correspondent. I would cover the State of the Union address. The next day it would be in the paper. This is what the president said. I sometimes interviewed people and did stories that took a couple weeks to do, but something that took months and months and a year to do, I never really did. The closest I came to was back in 1985, I wrote a 3-part series on the Midwest farm crisis, because a lot of farmers in Missouri were losing their farms back in '85. And that probably took me 3 months to do, but I still don't know that that was an investigative piece. There's less outlying in international news. Not because it doesn't matter, but because when you're short on staff, you cover, you don't cover extra things. And in America, international news, unfortunately, often is seen as an extra thing that's good to cover. But if you don't have anyone to do it, they're going to leave it out. There are fewer beats. Who can tell me what a beat is? Yeah.
It's like an area of like news or like something that a particular person covers for their story.
Yeah, it's a particular topic area that reporters are assigned for a couple of reasons. And examples might be the religion beat, the sports beat, the science beat, the education beat. And some reporters might have multiple beats. Like at the Missourian, one of the reporters that covers education also covers other stuff. There are general assignment reporters that as something comes up, it's just like, okay, this is general assignment, go do it. But beats, which aren't as prevalent as they once were, they're a really good idea for a couple of reasons. One is, as a reporter, if you're going to cultivate sources, it helps to cover the same topic from week to week. Like I was a congressional correspondent. My job was to cover Congress for Baptist News Service. So every morning I would read the paper on the train into work, and then I would go to Congress and I would walk around and see, you know, what news was going on. I'd get a copy of the congressional record to see what was going on yesterday. And then because I was just one little person, I would pick the most relevant story or two of interest to our readers. And then I might go to a hearing and cover it, or I might just call people, cover it that way. Depends on what the story was. But as a result, I was able to know, not really congressmen myself or congresswomen, but I knew staff of the House and Senate press galleries. And so I think more famous reporters probably knew the senators and congressmen. I was in the room with them, but I was usually at a table in the back. But knowing the people on your beat makes a difference, and knowing the topic. My very first story when I got that job was I showed up on a Monday, filled out some HR paperwork, and they said, we need a story by noon on the Civil Rights Bill pending in Congress. I'm like, okay. I knew nothing about it. So they did give me a stack of stuff, and they maybe even moved my deadline a little. But the point is, if you have specialized knowledge for a beat, it really comes in handy. And they can't really afford people to only know about one thing because there are fewer reporters. And I think that's kind of a shame. Because it helps to have somebody covering a particular topic. But today in journalism, they just can't afford that as much. There's a lot less independent reporting at individual outlets. One of the things that occurs is that there's something called Associated Press, which is a wire service nationally. And if you pay a fee to it, like a subscriber, when their stories come out, you can just put them in your paper. And they're legitimate news, but they're national news everybody else has. So there's a little less independent reporting that's local. I'm not saying it doesn't occur, but newspapers will fill their holes up with more wire copy because they don't have the reporting staff they once had. That's also an opportunity and advantage for public relations people because they are more likely to run a news release almost as is more than they used to be because they need to fill holes. So there's just less independent reporting. So these less resources and less independent reporting comes at the time where there's a nonstop, insatiable desire for news. So we have, you know, our 24/7 news stations, and we have the internet that we constantly have to feed. And so that has led to some shortcomings. How does having 24/7 news hurt the news industry? Seems like everybody's watching. That's a good thing, right? Not everybody, but they have an audience.
Well, with the 24-hour news cycle, there's a lot of news stories that are kind of cycled throughout the day. And I think also you can burn out the viewer pretty fast in the 24-hour news cycle. So.
Both really good observations. A lot of it's recycled news, and you really can burn the reader or the viewers out. I'll use my parents as an example. You know, well, my mom has passed, but before she passed, she and my dad loved the news. They were news consumers. They weren't news people. My dad was an engineering professor at Rolla. My mom was a homemaker. But they loved the news. They liked knowing what was going on. And after they retired, they would watch nonstop all day long, one 24-hour news station. They never turned it off, ever. Matter of fact, it's kind of frustrating to visit because like, can I just watch a movie? And one of the things that happened to them is they just began to almost fear the news would report the same thing over and over and over and over again. And over time, it would almost cause them to be fearful of things. It was really just the same story being retold. And so I remember one time, this is going to sound pathetic, so I probably shouldn't put this on tape. But years ago, I think I was living in Nashville at the time. My dad called me up out of the blue. I'm a single person. I don't know if I've ever said that or not. So I live alone. And Dad called me one day and he said, you know, Pam, if you disappeared, would anybody notice? Which I thought was a very insulting question, but I don't think he intended to be such. It's like, well, of course, Dad. I mean, if it's a weekend, they might not notice till Monday, but I think people would notice if I didn't show up to work. And I said, do you mind if I ask why you're asking? And during that time, there was a woman, this was years ago, so you may not remember this, but she was a runaway bride. It wasn't like the movie, this was real life. She was supposed to get married, and she just didn't show up, and she didn't contact anybody. And for days and days and days, they were searching for her because they thought, even if she had cold feet, she would tell them where she was. Well, she decided she didn't want to get married, and she ran off, and she was kind of checked into like a hotel type room, and she just didn't want to talk to anybody. She was ashamed, she was embarrassed. The next thing you know, she's all over the news. This would-be bride, is she missing, is she dead? And so finally, it took her a while. She came forward and confessed, and the police were furious because they said, we've been searching for you, and you cost us untold dollars. Anyway, my parents had been sitting there for like over a week watching about this one woman who disappeared. And so they thought, you know, if I disappeared, could anybody find me? And I thought that was a really weird leap. But that's an example of how if you do nothing but watch the news all day long, you can be kind of almost skewed by it. I mean, no offense to my dad. It also causes you to run things that you wouldn't normally run. I think 24/7 news stations have lowered the bar for what news is because they have to have news all the time. And sometimes some stories that might be a small story get overblown nationally because they have to have news on all the time. A really good example of this happened in 2001. There was a California congressman whose intern went missing. Her name was Chandra Levy. And the day she was supposed to leave Washington and go back to California, because she was a college student doing an internship, she disappeared. And nobody knew where she was. And her parents were worried, and she just went missing. So they were doing investigations, and in the course of the investigation, they found out that she'd had an affair with the congressman. And he was acting guilty as could be. He wouldn't cooperate with he would not talk to the press. At first, it felt like he wasn't cooperating with the police, and then he kind of did. And then at one point, when he thought nobody was looking, he drove to a dumpster and threw out evidence of his relationship to her, and then the police just went to the dumpster and picked it up. And so he was dumping evidence that he had a relationship with her. I think it was like a watch or something he'd given her, she'd given him. So the man looked guilty as sin. And I used to live in Washington, and all my friends are like, you know, we did it. And I said, no, we didn't. Congressmen don't kill interns over affairs because they happen every day. Murder is one thing and affair is another. Now, I had no knowledge, but this is just me talking dinner talk with my friends. It's like that congressman did not kill that girl. That's a much bigger scandal. And I hate to say it, but in 2001 and 2020, I don't think people care that much about people's affairs. So they did eventually find her body. She had been killed and dumped in a park. But he was on the news every night. Did he do it? Did he do it? Did he do it? Connie Chung, who's not really in the news anymore, she eventually got an interview with him where after something like 90 days, he's going to talk to the press. And so there was this sort of 80 days, 90 days, this countdown. And it was ludicrous because there was no new news. And I remember telling my classes at the time, this is happening because the 24/7 stations have to have something to talk about every night, but there's no new developments. This guy is a person of interest, but he's not, they can't find any evidence that he killed her. And this is insane. This should not be on the news every night. It took a local California story and maybe a mild national story because he was a congressman and turned it into a national obsession until 9/11. And when 9/11 happened, he disappeared from the news almost forever. So that tells me that they can obsess over and overblow a story until something bigger comes along. And they did find out that the congressman was innocent, but his name, which I've been very careful not to say here, although you may know who he is, his name was ruined because of months and months and months and months and months of speculation. So that's one of the shortcomings of nonstop coverage.
Did they ever find out who did it?
Yes, I can't remember, but it was somebody who had killed another girl. Like, she had gone running in the park, and I can't remember his name, but somebody who had killed another young woman grabbed her in the park and killed her and left her there. And so the congressman was guilty of the affair, but he did not. It was a random act of violence against women by one guy in the park, and they did catch him. And interestingly enough, that was not on the news constantly the way the congressman's was. Of course, once you catch the guy and say who it is, there's no need to go on and on. But live news is another interesting trend in journalism that it has had an impact too. It has diminished the gatekeeping role. So if something's happening live, you just kind of cover it versus deciding that day what to issue. So what do you guys think about live coverage? What's the last time we've had live coverage of something that was news? We want to count the debate?
I guess it's a bit of the debate, yeah. I mean,
Yeah, what do you guys think of the debate?
It was ridiculous.
It was ridiculous. Okay.
What I said coming out of it, I said both of them lost, especially the public. It was just bad. I don't think it was good for either one of them.
I don't think either of them lost anything, but I don't think either of them gained anything. I think there's just, if you're like a Trump supporter, then you were like, all right, you know, like they both look like idiots, I'm still gonna say for Trump, and like same thing for Biden. I don't think they gained anything, but they didn't lose anything.
I don't think too many people probably changed their minds, probably.
No.
At this late date, if you don't know who you're voting for, then you're probably not going to vote. Because I think by now, you know which person you're voting for. And if you don't, you're probably disinterested enough that you're just not going to vote. That would be my speculation.
I'm at that point. I wasn't gonna vote, and my mom's like, it was my first election. Mom's like, you should at least vote like in your first election, you'll regret it. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm not gonna tell anyone who I'm voting for, and I might just not even, I might do some research and like third party. We'll see.
Yeah. I had several different thoughts. One was, my first thought was, this is actually kind of entertaining in kind of a weird way, because I've never seen a presidential debate like that ever. And I've been watching them since the 70s. I was born in the 60s. I didn't watch them as a kid. But it was also annoying because I just wanted them to not talk over each other. And so the presidential commission is talking about new rules and new structures. And it's like, that's not going to work. I think, I'm half joking, okay. I think they just ought to remove the moderator, ring a bell, let them go at it for an hour and a half.
That's funny.
That would be funny. And here's some boxing gloves, if that's what you want to do. But it was unusual. But that was sort of a live news event. And a lot of people criticized Chris Wallace. I tell you what, that would have been a hard thing to moderate. Yeah, it just would have been hard. Maybe he could have done a little better. I don't know. But I don't think anybody.
I mean, I think there were, I think some people had problems with the questions he asked.
Yeah.
Both of them, but I think as a moderator, he did a fine job as much as he could. You know,
I think he tried. I think he did too.
Yeah.
A lot of Monday morning quarterbacks, are like, well, he should have shut their mics off. And I don't know. I do think that there'll be an attempt to make the other one different. I'm just not curious. And if it's not, then the third one, I don't know if it's much use even watching the third one. Anyway, I guess that was sort of a live news event, if you will. It wasn't solid news coverage, but a lot of the 24/7 news stations really treated it as such.
I saw someone post like on Facebook or somewhere, I can't remember. They should wear like dog shot collars when you got to turn they get shot.
That's funny. Yeah, I mean, in past debates, people have spoken over each other a little bit, but it was just so much more civil, and it wasn't the entire hour and a half. It's just like Donald never stopped talking, and then Joe, I'm talking like I know him, Joe did it too. He was just, it was amazing. We still have investigative reporting in America. I've said the trend is for it to be less than, but we still have it. I think shows like 60 Minutes sometimes are an example of that. They'll work on stories for a really long time before they put them on the air. Again, investigative reporting is not in-depth reporting per se. It's something much bigger than that, something that takes many, 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 many months. There is an inclination towards softer news today. I don't think that's all bad, because when I was a reporter, people were always asking for, why don't you give us the good news? And good news tends to be softer news, and that's news too. If the soft news replaces the hard news we need to know, I think it becomes a problem. But, and we do need to be careful not to just have happy news and then it's going on, like the pandemic or fall of the stock market or something like that. So we talked a little bit on Tuesday about the concept of news. What makes something news? News is something that's out of the ordinary, that's relevant to readers, that deals with prominent people and deals with people in proximity to your news organization. But something that's out of the ordinary.
She said, wait, you want us to?
Hey, somebody needs to mute their mic at home. I don't know who it is, and I'm not mad at you, but we can hear somebody talking, so mute your mic if you don't mind. Unless you have something to talk to us about class about.
I missed that.
James Gordon Bennett and how
I
he.
told her whenever the first time that she brought me over here, I was like, why would you get live plans, Riley? You cannot keep them alive.
That's what I was saying. They started talking about it.
Hey, Ryan.
Okay.
Hey, Riley, I think your mic is on. I turned it off.
No, that's what it did. It was really bad.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'm not trying to embarrass her. There we go, thank you. So James Gordon Bennett was a very influential man who helped kind of create the modern notion of news, and we talked about how he did that on Tuesday. Let's see here. There have been a lot of different news models, and so we talked about through years the rethinking of news. One thing we didn't say, but I think I'll point it out here, is people talk a lot about objective news. And that is the standard still by which journalism is done in America. But that's a relatively new concept. When journalism began in the colonies during the Revolutionary period, it was very partisan because the press really whipped people up into trying to have their own country. The press played a very pivotal role in the American Revolution. And then once we were formed as a new country, the colonial press was pretty biased, if you would. Then we entered a period in the new country where we had party press. And so we had people divided in the early America that some of them wanted a more centralized government, some of them wanted a less centralized government, and they formed like party newspapers, and they would criticize each other. So there was a newspaper that criticized Washington, and a newspaper that criticized Adams and Jefferson. And so they had a very vitriolic press called the party press. We eventually went into a yellow journalism era that was very bombastic, and it used exaggeration to sell newspapers. And the yellow journalism period got so out of hand that some journalists are like, you know, people don't want to read all this crazy stuff. So they began to be more objective-based, more fact-based. And that's really a 20th century notion of journalism that began around 1900 and continues today. And so we've had several rethinking of what news should be. And I would say today we kind of have a mix. Objectivity is still sought after by most people, but we definitely have still, today we have a partisan press, don't we, in some ways, in some institutions, whether or not they claim it. So we kind of have a mixed group. But this is definitely a digital journalism age in which a lot of different thoughts about the news prevail. We talked about the kind of values that reporters have, their love of democracy, their lockstep with capitalism because they're Americans, and you know the notion of fighting for the little guy, holding the government accountable, those kinds of things. And then today we talked about journalism trends. I thought it was interesting, Wednesday morning, all the journalists on all the morning programs, because I tried to watch several after the debate, how they all went after Chris Wallace, and it's like, well, I would have done this, and he should have done that, and I don't know, maybe there were some things he could have done better, but you know, if they had been in that seat, could they have done it? Or is it just easy to kind of sit back and criticize? I thought that was interesting. I actually felt kind of sorry for Chris.
Yeah, I did too. I don't know how you can keep anybody in line without cutting their mic. Without cutting people's mic.
Yeah, they would have had to, and that's going to be one of the new rules they're talking about is if anyone gets out of line, that the moderator can cut their mic. But I can see why, let's say 30 minutes into it, he decides to cut Trump's mic. Oh, it's not fair. It's not fair. Fake news, fake news, fake news. And, you know, if you cut Biden's mic, I don't know what his response would have been, but if you keep it cut too long, you know, it's going to be who's fair, who's not fair. So the next one will be interesting.
I just think as future leaders, or as they should be representing themselves in a better light as more like polite. Like I can understand getting upset if someone like were attacking you like that, but you still have like the respect for the other person to wait your turn. And then when it's your turn to say something back, keep a notepad, write down something that they said so you have a rebuttal.
It was less mature than a debate that you would have had in a kindergarten class.
Yes.
Well, it would have been much more effective if they had waited.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no question. And
It wasn't effective for anyone to get any voter or anything.
no, I think the biggest surprise to most people was that Biden didn't blow his top. There were a couple times when he called him a clown, and then one other time he told him to shut up. But he did it kind of caught himself because Biden, you know, Biden can have kind of a temper, and so the fact he didn't just explode. But it was not a good showing. It was for the country.
I hope they'll do it in some kind of, well, they had which one was? Clinton and Trump had the one where it was in a town hall style, and I hope they do that again.
Yeah, they're having one at Belmont, my old school.
Okay.
They're having the presidential debate in Nashville, but I don't know if it's the second or the third one. That Belmont has just a really beautiful facility that's kind of set up for something like that. But we can see when it comes to something like that, how germane, how central news is to our daily lives and how much we rely on it. Even if sometimes we get frustrated by the news and frustrated by the way they handle it. Any questions, anybody? Thank you for the good discussion today. I appreciate it. And those of you from home, we appreciate you zooming in as well. I think I'm gonna, yes, you have a question?
I do have one question. So you're talking about yellow journalism. And
Yes.
I know like they got the name yellow journalism from like the comic they had, like the yellow boy.
Uh-huh.
But why was the boy yellow? I don't think I remember seeing that.
I don't know if that was just sort of an artistic decision. I don't know if the yellow was meant to represent anything bad. Although I think the kid in the comic book was meant to be kind of like a Pigpen kind of character from Peanuts. He was meant to be kind of a dirty character.
Yeah.
So the yellow might be some form of stain.
Okay.
But I'm surmising, because I don't know if I know for sure if it's just the color the artist picked.
That makes sense though.
Yeah, that's what I would think, but to be honest, I've never read that. And so that's where that came from. The yellow journalism is a really fascinating period. But the result of that and the over-exaggeration of things is what gave us objective journalism. And so throughout the history of our country, it has lasted a long time. It began right around the turn of the 20th century, and we're still sort of in that era. Okay, I'm gonna turn the recording off here, and I'm gonna let people go home, and I will clean seats.